Well, we have Mr. Attorney General Alberto Gonzales on today. He's, I don't know which title to call him, former Attorney General, Judge, Dean, Professor. Amazing, all the different things you've done. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be here. I think this is a very important topic and happy to talk about it.
Well, tell us before we get into the topic of prosecutorial independence, um, a little about your background and where you grew up, because I think it's important for folks to hear all that.
Sure. I'm a Texan, but I reside currently in Tennessee. I've been here for about 11, 12 years. I've been the dean at Belmont Law School in Nashville for about like 9 or 10 years. And I was the second dean, and it's been a great experience. So we've done pretty well as a law school here, and it's I've been able to take advantage of all the experiences I've had as a lawyer, either in private practice, on the bench, running a state agency, running a federal agency, advising a governor, advising a president, and I think all that's been helpful in terms of talking to our students about the great things about being a lawyer. When people get in trouble today, they call a lawyer, and part of our job is to serve, and we are champions for people in need, and in this role, I get to promote that. So it's been a good experience, and very much enjoyed being here at Belmont and in Nashville.
It's so great that you say how we're champions. I always talk about how much I love being a lawyer because we get to fight for different clients, different ideas, different causes, and I always am troubled by folks who say they don't like their job as a lawyer. Like, to me, this is the greatest job you could have.
Well, I can see the frustration. Sometimes it can be trying, and I have met many unhappy lawyers. The job can be very, very stressful. And what I try to tell our students is, there are many opportunities in various ways you can serve your community and people around the country, and the thing is to find what's right for you.
Right.
I tell them when you graduate, just get a job, any kind of legal job. That's the most important thing. And then after a few years, after you've learned a little bit about what it's like to be a lawyer, look around and see what is it that really makes you happy and that you're good at. Because before you know it, life is so short. You get as old as I am, and you look back at your life and you think, well, what was it all for? So it is important to try to find something that makes you happy, and you have many opportunities to do that as a lawyer.
Well, Dean, you say you're getting old. You look great, man. I don't know what your secret is. You're gonna have to share with me because look, I got old. I don't know what happened.
Well, I would say we both look very youthful. We're aging well. How about that for both
Let,
of us?
let me ask you this before we get into the prosecutorial independence stuff. As dean and as someone who worked their way up in Texas, how important is diversity in the law and in our institutions? DEI has been under such criticism recently, and I was wondering your take as dean, how important it is or not important.
You know, I I think it's important to the extent that our population, the people that we serve, are diverse, and I think it provides some level of confidence, less suspicion in the profession by people of different races and colors. But at the end of the day, it really is about competence. You have a job to do as a lawyer to represent your client, and I'd like to think that as a Hispanic, I don't care if my lawyer is white. What I care about is whether or not they're a great lawyer. Can they serve the needs? And so, while I recognize some value, I worry sometimes that we pay too much attention to it, and maybe that is probably hearsay. I mean, heresy among certain communities. But for most minorities, our common prayer is just give us a chance to prove ourselves. That's all we want. Just give us a chance. And if we can't do it, we can't do it. But if we can do it, that's what we want, is that opportunity to be successful.
And I mean, you got those opportunities, and you were, people looked up to you in the Hispanic community, and that was an important thing. They saw that somebody could rise to be the Attorney General of the United States.
Well, and and I've was often asked, What does it feel? Were you proud to be the first Hispanic Attorney General?" And I would say, there is no brown justice or black justice or white justice. There is just justice.
Sure.
And I tried to do my job with that in mind. However, I think I can safely say that as I travel the country, people, Hispanics would come up to me and say, my grandfather or my grandmother cried when George Bush announced that he was going to put you as the Attorney General of the United States. And so in various households in America, that was a big deal because you're right. Role models are very, very important for children to look to see that there are role models, people that look like them, people with the same kind of background, and can achieve great things. And we're hearing some of that today with respect to the rise to the campaign of Kamala Harris. Whatever you may think about her politics and her policies, there are a lot of kids out there that are looking at her and saying, and women, young girls, and saying, you know what? Look what's possible. Maybe I can do that one day.
Listen, I have three daughters, and so it's important for them to see it, and I think it's a great thing. Let's turn to prosecutorial independence, because the ABA just started this task force on prosecutorial independence that you're helping to spearhead.
I'm not, well, let me correct you. I'm not spearheading it. There is I think as a 24-member task force. I'm on the advisory, I'm in an advisory role, I think with Attorney General Loretta Lynch, former Deputy Attorney General Larry Thompson. So we've got advisory. My role is purely advisory, but it is a good group on the task force, and I think they're doing very important work.
Amazing group. And so what is the idea? What is prosecutorial independence? Why do we need it, and why is it so important?
Well, it's the notion that prosecutors, I view them as sort of administrators of the justice system, and we need people that are independent and fair-minded and qualified to make decisions as to whether or not the liberty of an individual should be taken away because they've committed a crime. And that discretion, the decision as to whether to charge, that there's probable cause that a crime has been committed, that decision should be made based upon professional training and experience without any kind of political bias. And I think it's very, very important for our justice system to have prosecutors that are independent. We have prosecutors at various levels. Obviously, at the federal level, we have it at the state level, and we have it at the local level as well. We are one of the few countries, maybe the only country in the world, where the chief prosecutor at the local level, generally, I think in 47 out of 50 states, they're elected. Now, why do we do that? Well, I think we do that because we believe that prosecutors at that level are more responsive to the needs and wants of the community. And by and large, the system has worked well because I think it is important for people at that level to be in contact with the community, to know the community wants and interests, because that is part of how one of the factors that I think prosecutors use and should use in making decisions about whether or not to prosecute a case, because not every crime is prosecuted. And that's part of the debate and discussion I think we're going to have today, is the fact that there is discretion in our prosecutors as to whether or not to prosecute a crime. And the debate is whether or not that discretion should be cabined in some way. Should prosecutors be punished in some way when they exercise their discretion, and someone in the state, in the community, doesn't like it?
Right. And that's exactly the topic I'd like to discuss. You mentioned that prosecutors by and large around the country, state court prosecutors, are elected. Of course, federal prosecutors are appointed. Is it better to have elections for state prosecutors? Should we have elections for federal prosecutors too? Or what's a better system to have set up?
I don't know that we want to have federal elections. I guess we'd have 53 elections for the U.S. attorneys around the country. I don't. I think the current system works well, quite frankly, and I do support uh, more accountability at the local level, at the level where crime occurs in the community. You've got the local prosecutor who is well known in the community and is accountable to the community. And as I said earlier, knows the needs, the interest of that community, and is better able to take that into account as one important factor in deciding whether or not to charge someone for committing a crime. I like the current system at the federal level, of course. But it's interesting with respect to trying to determine, well, what are the priorities? Because a president, and we're seeing it now during this campaigns and tells the American people, these are my law enforcement priorities. And therefore the attorney general is responsible to making sure those federal priorities are carried out. Well, the attorney general himself or herself has his or her own set of priorities, law enforcement priorities. And so that gets communicated down to the U.S. attorneys. Then you get to the U.S. attorney level within their jurisdiction. They have their own because they have ties to the community. They see what the needs are within the community. So they have their own priorities as well. So there are levels of priorities that exist in our country. Sometimes it gets a little bit confusing. I have to admit to that. But I think the current system, to answer your question, I think works well.
By the way, one of the great elected state attorneys was Janet Reno down here in Miami, who of course became attorney general, was a predecessor of yours. I don't know if you ever got to meet her, but she was a force of nature down here in Miami.
Oh, I did get to meet her once. I went to her office, and I can't ever remember why, but to have a meeting with her to ask something from the Department of Justice. But yes, I agree with you that kind of experience at the local level is extremely important. I think made her a much stronger attorney general, and so I salute and applaud her service to this country.
We have this issue here in Florida with the independence of prosecutors because the governor here has, of course, it's well known in public, fired two elected state attorneys. And, it's interesting. Should governors have that power to fire state attorneys? And when should it be used? I mean, that certainly impacts the independence of state attorneys.
Well, within every state, there are different means of addressing the dereliction of duty by a prosecutor, and sometimes it does occur, or maybe perhaps the prosecutor no longer has a mental capacity, for example, to do their job, and so there has to be a way to replace that prosecutor in that situation, and it differs from state to state. I am less offended about removing an elected prosecutor through an election or recall election because it's the people that put them in office. It's the people that taken them out of office. But in some states, you have a different system where you may have the chief appointing officer, like the governor, making a decision to remove someone. Now, if that removal was based upon political reasons, then I have a problem with it, quite frankly. If they're not doing their job, they're not enforcing the law, prosecuting cases as they should, that's a different story. But if they're removed for political reasons, I think it's problematic. In some states, I think it was like Georgia, they created a commission to evaluate whether or not a prosecutor should be removed. And so there are various ways that could happen. And, the factors that are used or considered in removing a prosecutor, I think are vitally important, should not be used if they're simply done for political reasons. If the prosecutor is not doing his or her job, then obviously I think there needs to be a change. That people need to have a very active, very focused prosecutor within their community.
It's interesting because there's this tension, of course, right? Like on the one hand, there's criminal laws on the books. People want them enforced. They're passed criminal laws. On the other hand, if an elected state attorney says, I'm going to enforce it this way, the people have elected that person ostensibly, based on their views about what they would and wouldn't enforce. It's a really tough line to figure out whether they've crossed. And in Florida, at least in the two cases, Monique Worrell and Andrew Warren, there's litigation on both about what happened. And, in the Warren case in the 11th Circuit, has said, listen, he was just exercising his First Amendment rights, and you can't fire someone based on that. And they've sent the case back for exploration about whether he should have been fired. On the Worrell case, the Florida Supreme Court said, no, the governor was within his rights to fire her. And that was a state case because she wasn't enforcing the minimum mandatory sentences. So it's really interesting because it's a tough line to draw about whether they're just talking and exercising their First Amendment or whether they're not enforcing the laws as they're supposed to.
Yeah, well, whether or not, even if the governor was within his rights, the question is, should he exercise that right, that power? And maybe, the answer is, well, we'll let the voters decide at the next election for that governor, quite frankly. They may decide, you know what, we think it was wrong that you fired this prosecutor. So I think you have different scenarios all across the country because every state, uh, you know, chooses how it's going to deal with the decisions made by prosecutors.
What about, Dean, the situation in which a state attorney runs on the premise, I'm just not going to prosecute this kind of case, or I'm going to run on the premise where I will not seek the death penalty for folks, even though there is a death penalty provision on the books, and that person gets elected. Um, is that something that a governor should just say, well, that person got elected, so that's on them, or should they take action?
Well, I'm glad you're asking me very easy questions.
Yeah, no,
Because the truth
the tough ones.
the truth of the matter is, I have a problem with a blanket announcement that I'm not going to that as a prosecutor, I'm not going to prosecute certain kinds of crimes. I believe that creates a separation of powers issues when you have the legislature said, this kind of conduct results in a crime, and you as the prosecutor, chief prosecutor in the state or the county or city say, I'm just not going to prosecute these kinds of crimes. I don't think it's appropriate for a prosecutor to make that kind of blanket announcement. Now, because of limitation of resources within an office, because of the needs and wants and interests of a local community, because of what's in the best interest of justice, sometimes a prosecutor is going to decide we're not going to prosecute certain kinds of cases. I get that, but I think you communicate that quietly within the office and say, you know what, we have certain priorities. These are the crimes that I think should be prioritized. And if we have resources to prosecute other kinds of crimes, we're going to do that. So that's the way that I would handle it. I think I'm uncomfortable with this notion. I'm just I'm going to get elected based on this platform of not prosecuting certain kinds of crimes. And you're right; it makes it more difficult if you're successful. If that's the case, and have the people, maybe we should have an election where the people decide, all right, we want to change the law. With something, there's a tension there. There's no question about it. But
Right.
I think I've explained to you where I think many prosecutors how they would deal with this notion of announcing a blanket amnesty or because if you say to the city in the city of New York, we're not going to prosecute shoplifting anymore. Well, what's going to happen? Everyone's going to shoplift, right?
Yeah.
It's going to increase. You don't do that. We all understand that the prosecutors in New York have limited resources, a lot of violent crime there. You focus on that. And if they have resources and the time, then you go after the shoplifters.
It is interesting, right? Because prosecutors used to run on things like, I'm going to focus my resources on X. That's how it used to be. Now prosecutors are running on, I'm not going to use resources for this other thing over here. And it is an interesting way to run.
Yeah, I think it's better and probably safer to talk about what I'm going to prioritize. And if the public, the voters support that, you get elected, that makes it easy. And if you have money left over, you have the time left over, then you go after other crimes as well.
Now, Dean, it's interesting also to look at sort of the mirror image, which is the federal prosecutors, because every time there's a new election, right, we get a whole new slate of U.S. attorneys. So there is some politicization of the federal prosecutors, on the election cycle. Should attorneys general have the attorney general have the ability to fire prosecutors who don't want to stick around? Oh, who do want to
Well,
stick around? I'm sorry, who want to stick around after the election?
okay, you're talking about the U.S. attorneys who are appointed. Uh,
Correct.
Generally, U.S. attorneys serve at the pleasure of the president. They're appointed by the president. By statute, they do have 4-year terms, and once the 4-year term expires, then there really is no argument for the U.S. attorney to believe that he or she should remain in office. I wouldn't view it as politicized when changes occur with the new administration. The expectation is the president of the United States should have his own people in place at the Department of Justice to ensure the safety of the American people. That's always been the case. I suspect it will always be the case. So I don't view that as political, quite frankly. It's just simply the situation where it's like the president has an entire new cabinet. Okay, even though there may have been some great people serving in the previous cabinet, nonetheless, a president is entitled to his team. Everyone understands that, and that's never been an issue.
I remember when my friend Alex Acosta was appointed as U.S. Attorney down here. Now, Alex, I didn't know him at the time, and he wasn't an experienced prosecutor, and he was under a lot of heat when he got appointed. And he announced his priorities as U.S. Attorney and got a lot of heat for that, but then became one of the best U.S. attorneys, in my opinion, that we've had down here. So it's interesting to see that you don't need to have a ton of experience as a line prosecutor, for instance, to be running one of these offices.
Well, you need to have good judgment. You have to remember that you have experienced prosecutors, career prosecutors in these offices. They know how to do it. They know how to be successful in prosecuting cases. And so they are there to assist the politically appointed U.S. attorney. And so it is absolutely true. You don't have to have experience as a criminal prosecutor or as a criminal defense lawyer. You just have to have good judgment. Surround yourself. Make sure you're. I always say, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Yeah.
Make sure that you're surrounded by people that are really smart, very experienced, and have good judgment. And so yeah, and I'm not surprised. That's why Alex Acosta was nominated and confirmed, is because of the belief that even though he may have lacked the experience of someone else, more experience, that nonetheless he would be successful.
Now we do all of us believe in prosecutorial independence and discretion, but there is a problem with prosecutors when they do become political. I mean, there were ridiculous charges brought against you by some political prosecutor back in 2008 that were obviously dismissed and absurd. But what should we do with prosecutors when they do cross the line to being political?
Well, they should be held accountable, but that's got to be through due process. They must know the reasons for the as to why they're being investigated or looked at, be given notice, provided a hearing before a neutral decision maker. I think that is important. You're right. If the office as a prosecutor cannot be used for political purposes, saying I'm going to prosecute my enemy here because they're my enemy, or they're the enemy of my best friend. That can never be the case. And so there should be an opportunity to remove prosecutors who make charging decisions not is not based on what is in the best interest of justice, but based on political or personal reasons that are totally inappropriate, that we would all agree are inappropriate.
Listen, I'm sure my listeners are going to have views on whether, the cases against Donald Trump should be brought or not. My issue, and I'm not going to, say one way or the other, but I do think it's weird for a prosecutor to run on the premise of, I'm going to prosecute this person. I think that's a weird platform to run on, and I can understand the criticism of running on a platform like that, because it does create a political problem for the prosecution.
I agree with you. I think that's a mistake. I think I might go so far as to say I'm going to really focus on these kinds of crimes,
Right.
but to identify people individually, I think is a mistake, because it does look like a vendetta, and I think that that's harmful to the lawyers in that office, quite frankly, and the work that they're doing, and it sets a bad example.
Now, Dean, when you were counsel to the president, there was, of course, a lot of discussion about independence with Ashcroft and the showdown with Comey. I don't know if there's any story you can tell about that, about the independence, and whether you're willing to share anything about that old story.
Well, I'm not sure particularly what you're referring to. There was a disagreement that occurred between the White House and the Department of Justice relating to a surveillance program, and as to whether or not the president had authority to do this. General Ashcroft had approved it for multiple times. He gets sick and goes into the hospital, and Jim Comey becomes the acting attorney general, and they go back and take a look at the activity and inform us right when General Ashcroft is in the hospital that there's no legal authority to continue to do this. And we spoke with Jim Comey and asked, well, could we defer this? Because what they wanted us to do was discontinue the activity. And we asked, could we defer this until General Ashcroft comes out of the hospital, because he's approved it multiple times. He has said this is lawful. They refused to do so. And then, of course, the next morning, the Madrid train bombing happens, and many, many Spaniards are killed by this terrorist attack. And at that point, President Bush felt he had no choice, that he had to authorize this surveillance, and that we would try to come to some kind of resolution as soon as General Ashcroft got out of the hospital. So there was that disagreement, and it was obviously a very serious disagreement. But as White House counsel, I realize, and I still do today, and I talk about this quite a bit with audiences. The White House counsel has no business being involved in making decisions about what is lawful and what is a crime. That's the job of the Attorney General in the Department of
Sure.
Justice.
Right.
And so my job would simply be to have an understanding of what the department is doing, but not to interfere in any way with a charging decision or a decision as to whether or not an activity is lawful or not. That was a very unique situation. And I regret that it happened. In fact, the first time I saw General Ashcroft after that incident, when he was out of the hospital, I told him I was sorry about what had happened, because it was very uncomfortable. And I think it was uncomfortable for him because he had approved it 20 something times. And now his team was saying, well, it's not, you can't do that. And I think he probably was a little bit embarrassed. I was embarrassed, but I think it's an example of, the lawyers simply doing their best to try to find what is the right thing to do here to protect America in a way that's consistent with the Constitution and the laws passed by Congress.
What a time to look back on and reflect. Are you still close with former President Bush and his family?
I'd like to think I am, although I haven't spoken to him in over a year. And I really respect the fact that he has stayed out of the fray. He knows that he's done it. He had his chance. He's done his duty. History will judge him, and he's not about to. I'd be shocked if he comes out publicly one way or the other with this in connection with this presidential campaign, because that's just not the way. That's just not who he is.
I do love seeing the camaraderie he has with the Clintons and Obamas when they're all together. It is a time that, I feel like we miss.
Well, it was a different time. I really do think it was a different time. And it was a different time with Reagan and Tip O'Neill. So much has changed today, and I think not for the good. I worry, I have concerns about our country. I worry about some of the rhetoric in this campaign. I give credit to the vice president for embarking on a message of optimism. What a great country we are, because we are a great country. And I think, honestly, it's going to resonate with more people as opposed to going dark and talking about what's wrong with this country. We have some serious issues, and there are many Americans that are hurting, no question about it. But go to other countries. I have had the opportunity as AG to visit a lot of other countries. And if you do that, you'll realize how lucky we are to be in America, right?
Amen. Absolutely. Are you making an endorsement today, or are you endorsing?
No, I'm not. I haven't decided yet what I'm doing. I'm just telling you what resonates with me and what I think is going to resonate with most Americans.
Let me ask you, Dean, since you are now at Belmont Law School, tell me about being the dean and teaching, and are you enjoying that? And is it a great part of your career?
Am I enjoying it? Well, it depends on when you ask me. The administrative stuff gets a little tedious, and faculty, bless her heart, they get excited over the littlest things, and I try to tell them, it's okay. It'll be okay. We'll find an answer to this. But the best part is just being in front of students.
So
understanding that
great.
they represent the future of our country and our community. And if I can have just a little influence on their thinking, their commitment to this country, to me, that makes it all worthwhile. So I really very much enjoy speaking with young people and just encouraging them to think seriously about spending part of their professional life giving back to this community and this country.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, one of the themes of this podcast is about trials, and I try to inspire young lawyers to go to trial because that's what our system is based on. One of the issues we have is this huge trial penalty now that criminal defendants, if they go to trial and lose, they get these monster sentences. Any thoughts on the trial penalty and how we can get more trials back into our system?
I don't know that I have any good ideas about this. I will say we have a professor here who's one of his main projects is looking at the issue of plea bargaining, in that so many people who are innocent plead guilty. Why? Because many of them are poor. They can't afford good lawyers. They can't afford to miss a lot of time at work. And so rather than going through a lengthy trial, they plead guilty. They want to avoid a very long sentence, the possibility of a long sentence. And so that is something that I think that all of us in the legal profession should be looking at and be concerned about the fact that we have innocent people who think it's safer to plead guilty than to go through the experience of a trial and risk possibly losing.
Dean, one of the last things I'd like to talk to you about, and I always ask folks this because I think people are interested. You were the attorney general, probably working 20 hours or more a day. How are you able to stay healthy, sleep? What did you eat? Did you exercise at all? How did you do it when you were attorney general?
Well, there are over 100,000 people that work at the Department of Justice, so you're pretty well supported. And you're driven around in two black Suburbans with FBI agents carrying machine guns.
Yeah.
So they take pretty good care of you, quite frankly. And I remember a couple times days a week, I would get on a bike with my detail behind me, would run along the Potomac River, and that was always a lot of fun. So finding ways to relieve stress is very, very important, and that continues today, quite frankly.
What do you do? What hobbies do you have to get rid of the stress?
Well, I try to do a lot of exercise, quite frankly. I'm a racquetball player, although my body is wearing down playing racquetball. And so people are trying to convince me to take up pickleball. I don't know about that. Maybe you're a pickleball fan.
I'll tell you, I grew up playing racquetball with my dad, who was also
Yeah.
a lawyer, and I love racquetball. To me, is the best workout you can get. I haven't played in a long time, but it is to me the most fun and best workout you can get.
Well, but it's brutal on the body, on the joints, the knees, the shoulders, and I can feel the wear and tear. So I'm looking for something a little bit different, a little easier, better for my body.
So one last area that I'll ask you about, the chief judge of our 11th Circuit down here, William Pryor, wanted me to send his regards and ask you who was the best appellate judge ever appointed during the Bush administration.
Does he even have to ask? Come on, that's an easy one. It's Judge Pryor. And as we were talking earlier, he just received just a great tribute from Justice Thomas. And, very, very proud. And I'm sure President Bush is proud of the appointment of Will Pryor. He's done a fabulous job on the circuit court and just a great ambassador, quite frankly, for the judiciary. So we're very, very proud of Will Pryor.
Well, Dean, I just want to thank you for doing the time. I know it's the beginning of school right now. You got students coming in, and I hope you teach them all the great things about being a lawyer, about prosecutorial independence, all this great stuff. And I just want to thank you for taking the time this morning to speak to us.
Thanks for having me.